The bakery sat on a corner in the oldest part of town, the kind of place that had been there since gaslight first flickered against cobblestones and would probably remain long after the world forgot what real magic looked like. It had wooden display cases with curved glass fronts that showed off tiers of frosted cakes and delicate pastries, and the scent of vanilla and caramelized sugar hung in the air like an enchantment. The late afternoon light poured through the front windows, making everything glow warm and golden, as if the shop itself were wrapped in honey. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Inside, behind the counter, Madame Rosetta was arranging a tray of petit fours when the little girl came in. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with light brown hair pulled into two pigtails that sat at uneven angles, as if she'd done them herself that morning without a mirror. She wore a pink dress with small daisies on it, slightly too big, the sleeves falling past her wrists. She clutched a small cloth purse against her chest with both hands, holding it like it contained the most important thing in the world. Her eyes, wide and blue as a summer sky, swept over the rows of cakes in the display, and she moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid that even breathing too hard might shatter something beautiful. Madame Rosetta had owned this bakery for 40 years, and she could tell a lot about people by how they walked through her door. This child walked like someone who knew that treats were special, that you didn't take them for granted, that sometimes you saved every penny for something sweet. "Hello, darling," Madame Rosetta said gently, coming around the counter. "Can I help you find something?" The little girl looked up at her with serious blue eyes, the kind of seriousness that only children with grown-up worries ever have. "I need to buy a birthday cake," she said, her voice small but determined. "It's for my mama. She's turning 30 tomorrow, and I want to surprise her." "That's very sweet of you," Madame Rosetta said, her heart already softening. "What kind of cake does your mama like?" "Chocolate," the girl said immediately. "She loves chocolate. And she likes flowers, so maybe a cake with flowers on it." She paused, then added more quietly, "But I only have $5. She reached into her cloth purse and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, holding it up with both hands as if it were a treasure. Which Madame Rosetta thought it probably was to her. Madame Rosetta's heart squeezed tight. The cheapest cake in her shop was $35, and that was for a modest round layer. A proper birthday cake with buttercream flowers would run at least $80. But looking at this child's hopeful face, this tiny girl who had clearly saved for months, she couldn't bring herself to say no. "Let me see what I can do," Madame Rosetta said warmly. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," the girl said. "My mama's name is Helen." "Well, Emma, why don't you look at the cakes and tell me which one you think your mama would like best?" Emma pressed her nose to the glass, studying each cake with the intense concentration of a jeweler examining diamonds. Then she pointed, not to the simple cakes on the lower shelf, but to a magnificent chocolate masterpiece on the top tier. It was one of Madame Rosetta's special creations, a 3-layer chocolate cake with dark ganache, crowned with hand-sculpted sugar roses in shades of ivory and blush, their petals dusted with edible gold. Spun sugar vines cascaded down one side like something from a fairy tale. "That one," Emma breathed, her eyes shining. "That one is perfect." Madame Rosetta looked at the cake Emma had chosen. It was a custom order, made for a wedding anniversary that evening. It cost $130. She was trying to figure out how to gently redirect Emma to something more realistic, something that wouldn't break this child's heart, when the bell above the door chimed. And the world seemed to hold its breath. The man who entered was not a man at all, though he wore the shape of one. He was tall and impossibly elegant, moving with a grace that seemed to bend the air around him. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of silver white that caught the light like moonlit water. He wore robes of deep emerald velvet embroidered with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long, and a black crown sat upon his head, not a costume piece, but something ancient and real, forged from metal that drank the light rather than reflected it. But it was his eyes that stopped the breath in Madame Rosetta's throat. They were red. Not the red of infection or irritation, but the deep crimson of rubies held up to candlelight. And they carried within them a weariness that spoke of centuries, of endless nights, of a loneliness so profound it had its own weight. He moved to stand politely behind Emma, waiting his turn, and there was something about his posture, the way he held himself apart, as if he'd forgotten how to belong anywhere, that made Madame Rosetta's hands tremble slightly. "Excuse me, sweetheart," Madame Rosetta said to Emma, her voice a little unsteady. "Let me help this gentleman, and then we'll figure out your cake, all right?" But Emma was already turning around, and when she did, she looked up and up at the towering figure behind her. Most children would have run. Most children would have screamed. But Emma just tilted her head, studying him with those serious blue eyes, and said something that made the entire bakery fall silent. "Excuse me, sir," Emma said in her small, clear voice. "Do monsters get lonely too?" The man, the king, the creature of ancient night, froze. His crimson eyes widened, and for a moment, something cracked in that regal, untouchable expression. Something raw, something human. What? His voice was deep, smooth as velvet, but utterly startled. "You look lonely," Emma said matter-of-factly, as if she were simply observing the weather. "Your eyes look sad, like something hurts inside." "My mama's eyes look like that sometimes, when she's worried about bills or when she's really tired from work." "Are you missing someone?" Madame Rosetta started to apologize. "I'm so sorry, sir. Children sometimes." But the man held up one pale hand, and his expression had softened in a way that made him look less like a creature of nightmare and more like something lost. He crouched down slowly, carefully, until he was at Emma's eye level. The black crown caught the golden light, and for a moment, he looked like something out of a storybook, the kind where monsters learned to be human again. "You know what?" he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am lonely. I am missing someone." He paused, and something ancient and broken flickered through his gaze. "How did you know?" "Your eyes," Emma said simply. "They look like they've been sad for a really, really long time." The man let out a breath that might have been a laugh or might have been something closer to a sob held back for centuries. "You're very perceptive," he said. "What's your name?"
Emma.
"Emma Brooks." "I'm Valerius," he said. And then, as if the title still meant something even here, even now, Lord Valerius Draven. "That's a really long name," Emma said seriously. "Are you a king or something?" Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, sorrow, truth, something like that. "Nice to meet you, King Valerius," Emma said, as polite as if she were greeting a teacher. "I'm buying a birthday cake for my mama. She's turning 30 tomorrow, and I saved up my allowance for a really long time." She held up her $5 bill again, her small fingers gripping it tightly. "I want to get her that chocolate cake with the flowers because chocolate is her favorite, and she works really hard, and she deserves something beautiful." Valerius looked at the $5 bill. Then he looked at the cake Emma had pointed to, the masterpiece with sugar roses and gold dust. And Madame Rosetta saw understanding cross his pale, perfect face. He straightened up slowly and met Madame Rosetta's eyes over Emma's head. Something passed between them, a recognition of the situation, of what it meant, of the choice hanging in the air like the scent of sugar. "That's a beautiful cake," Valerius said, his voice gentle. "Your mother is lucky to have such a thoughtful daughter." "The thing is," Emma said, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if she were confessing a terrible secret, "I don't think $5 is enough. But it's all I have." And in that moment, with the golden light streaming through the windows and the smell of sugar in the air, and a little girl's hope trembling on the edge of breaking, the vampire king, who had not felt anything in 300 years, felt his long-dead heart begin to stir. This moment, this exact breath between Emma's confession and what happens next, would become legend. But to understand why a king of eternal night knelt before a child of fleeting mortality, we must go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the day Emma Brooks first learned that $5 could buy more than cake. It could be a miracle. And it could save a king who'd forgotten how to be saved. Valerius had not planned to enter a human bakery that afternoon. For 3 centuries, he had walked the earth like a ghost passing through walls, present but not there, existing but not living. He had ruled kingdoms that crumbled to dust. He had commanded armies that history forgot. He had loved people who died while he remained, unchanging, untouched by time, until the weight of their absence became so heavy he stopped letting anyone close enough to leave. He had stopped celebrating birthdays when the numbers lost meaning, stopped counting years when they all blurred into one endless night, stopped feeling much of anything except the cold, hollow ache of eternity. And yet, something had drawn him here today. A pull he couldn't name. A whisper in the winter air said, "This way."
Just once more. Look.
So he walked through the door of Madame Rosetta's bakery, expecting nothing, wanting nothing, until a child with uneven pigtails looked up at him and asked if monsters got lonely. And the answer, the terrible, undeniable answer, was yes. Now, standing in the golden warmth of this impossibly mortal place, Valerius felt something shift inside his chest, something he'd thought had fossilized centuries ago. He looked down at Emma, at her small hands clutching that crumpled $5 bill, at the hope and worry warring in her blue eyes, and he did something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He knelt. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself until they were face to face. The black crown on his head caught the light, and Emma reached out, fearless, curious, and touched one of its sharp points with a fingertip. "It's real," she whispered, awed. "It is," Valerius said softly. "Does it hurt to wear it?" The question was so innocent, so unexpected, that Valerius almost smiled. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Heavy things often do." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. Then her expression turned serious again, and she looked at the magnificent cake in the display case, the one that cost 26 times what she had in her hand. "I really want to get that one for Mommy," she said quietly, "because she doesn't smile enough anymore. She works 2 jobs, and she's always tired, and sometimes I hear her crying at night when she thinks I'm asleep." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "I just want her to smile, like she used to, before Daddy left." Valerius felt something crack inside him, a fissure in a wall he'd built brick by brick over centuries of loss. This child understood. She understood that love meant carrying weight for someone else. That devotion meant giving everything you had, even when it wasn't enough. That sometimes the people we love bear sorrows too heavy for their shoulders. "Your mother is very lucky to have you," Valerius said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. "Everyone deserves a cake," Emma said simply, as if this were an unshakable truth of the universe. "Everyone deserves something beautiful. Don't you think so?" Everyone deserves something beautiful. When was the last time he had believed that? When was the last time he had allowed himself something beautiful, something warm, something that might matter? Behind the counter, Madame Rosetta had gone very still. She was watching Valerius with narrowed eyes. Not frightened exactly, but knowing. Recognition flickered across her weathered face, the kind that came from old stories passed down through generations, tales told by firelight about creatures who walked between worlds. "You're him," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone. "The one from the old tales. The Winter King. The Lord of—" "I am someone who would like to buy this child a cake," Valerius interrupted gently but firmly. He rose to his full height and met Madame Rosetta's gaze. "The chocolate one. With the roses." "Sir, that cake costs—" "I know what it costs." Valerius reached into his robes and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, he drew several bills and placed them on the counter, more than enough to cover the cake and then some. "But this is not charity." He turned back to Emma, and something in his crimson eyes had softened, warmed, come alive in a way Madame Rosetta suspected hadn't happened in a very, very long time. "Emma Brooks," Valerius said, his voice carrying a weight that made the words feel like a vow, "I propose a partnership. You wish to bring your mother joy on her birthday. And I He paused, and for a moment, vulnerability flashed across his ancient face. I have forgotten what it means to celebrate anything at all. Perhaps we can help each other be brave. Emma tilted her head, confused but curious. What do you mean? I will help you buy this cake, Valerius said, kneeling again so they were equals. But in return, you must teach me something I have forgotten, how to make someone smile, how to celebrate, how to— His voice caught. How to matter to someone again. You already matter, Emma said with the absolute certainty of a child who saw the world in simpler, truer terms than any adult. You're helping me. That matters. Valerius felt warmth bloom in his chest, unfamiliar, almost painful, like blood returning to a limb that had been numb for too long. Then we are partners, he said, extending his pale hand. Birthday courage partners. Agreed. Emma's face split into the most radiant smile Valerius had seen in 300 years of existence. She grabbed his hand with both of hers and shook it enthusiastically. Agreed. And just like that, something fundamental shifted in the universe. A king who had been dead in all but body remembered what it felt like to be needed, to be wanted,
To matter.
Madame Rosetta carefully boxed the chocolate masterpiece, her hands trembling slightly as she tied the ribbon. When she handed it to Valerius, she whispered, "May it bring you what you're searching for, my lord." Valerius inclined his head in acknowledgement, then looked down at Emma. "It's getting late. The sun will set soon. May I walk you home?" A birthday courage partner should make sure her delivery arrives safely. Emma beamed up at him with complete, unearned trust, the kind that came before the world taught you to fear. "Yes, please. Mommy will be so surprised." As they walked toward the door, Valerius cradled the cake box in both hands. The cardboard was warm from the bakery's heat, and he held it carefully, reverently, as if it were made of glass, or as if it were the first fragile, beating thing he'd held in centuries. As if it were a heart. The streets of the old town were already filled with shadows by the time they stepped outside. The winter sun hung low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rose, and the air had that particular bite that warned of snow before morning. Emma walked beside Valerius, practically skipping, her earlier worry replaced by pure joy. She chattered as they went, her small voice filling the quiet spaces between them with warmth. "Mommy works at the diner on 5th Street during the day," Emma said, "and then she cleans offices at night 3 times a week. She says it's just for a little while, until we catch up on things, but it's been a little while for a really long time now." Valerius listened, his expression unreadable, but something tightened in his chest. He knew about carrying weight alone. He knew about just for a little while stretching into years, into decades, into centuries. "She's always tired," Emma continued, swinging her small purse. "But she still reads me stories before bed. And she sings to me, even when her voice is scratchy, and she can barely keep her eyes open. She sings the same song her mama used to sing to her. 'You are my sunshine.' Do you know that one?" "I do," Valerius said quietly. He had heard it sung in 100 different lifetimes, in a dozen different languages. It was one of those songs that survived because it carried something essential, love, simple and unbreakable. "Sometimes I pretend to fall asleep faster than I really do," Emma confessed, "because I can tell Mommy's really, really tired. But I like listening to her sing. It makes me feel safe." Valerius looked down at her. This small, brave creature who made herself smaller so her mother could rest. Who saved for months to buy a moment of happiness for someone else. Who understood sacrifice in a way most adults never learned. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman," he said, and his voice carried an ache he couldn't quite hide. "She is," Emma said proudly. Then she looked up at him with those 2 serious eyes. "Do you have a family, King Valerius?" The question hit him like a blade between the ribs. "I did," he said after a long moment. "A very long time ago." "What happened to them?" "Time happened," Valerius said softly. "Time takes everything, eventually. Even from those of us who don't want to let go." Emma considered this with the gravity of someone much older. "That sounds really lonely." "It is." They walked in silence for a moment, and Valerius noticed the way the light was changing. The sun was sinking faster now, and the shadows were stretching long across the street.
His time.
The hour when his kind grew stronger, when the veil between worlds grew thin. He felt it in his bones, the pull of darkness, the ancient hunger, the eternal cold. But for the first time in centuries, he also felt something else. Something warmer. Something that made him want to stay in the light just a little longer. "This is it," Emma announced, pointing to a modest apartment building with peeling paint and a crooked mailbox. "We're on the 3rd floor. The elevator's broken, so we have to use the stairs, but Mommy says that's okay because it means we get exercise." Valerius followed her up the narrow stairwell, carefully balancing the cake box. The building smelled of old cooking and worn carpet, and he could hear the sounds of other lives being lived behind thin walls. Televisions, arguments, laughter, crying babies. The sounds of humanity in all its messy, beautiful chaos. Emma stopped in front of apartment 3C and knocked excitedly. "Mommy, Mommy, I'm home." The door opened, and Valerius found himself looking at Helen Brooks. She was younger than he'd expected, 30, as Emma had said, but carrying herself like someone who'd aged faster than the years suggested. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore scrubs with a coffee stain on the collar. Her face was pretty but exhausted, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many double shifts and too few hours of sleep. But when she saw Emma, her whole expression softened with love so pure it almost hurt to witness. "Baby, I was getting worried," Helen began, and then her eyes landed on Valerius. She froze. Valerius saw the sequence of emotions cross her face in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, a flash of fear, and then, most powerfully, a mother's protective instinct snapping into place like armor. She stepped forward, placing herself subtly between Emma and this strange, impossibly tall man with silver hair and a crown. "Emma, come inside, sweetheart," Helen said carefully, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "But Mommy, wait." Emma burst out, practically vibrating with excitement.
Look.
"Look what we got you." Valerius stepped forward slowly, keeping his movements deliberately non-threatening, and held out the cake box. "Mrs. Brooks, I presume. Your daughter and I became partners this afternoon." "Partners?" Helen's voice was wary. "Birthday courage partners," Emma announced. "He helped me get your cake, Mommy. The beautiful one. The one with the chocolate, and the roses, and the gold." Helen looked at the expensive bakery box, then at Valerius, then at her daughter's shining face. "Emma, baby, we can't accept." "It is not a gift," Valerius said gently, his crimson eyes meeting hers with an honesty that made her breath catch. "It is a partnership. Your daughter saved for months to buy you something beautiful because she loves you. I simply helped her achieve her goal. We are birthday courage partners, she and I. She helps me remember what it means to celebrate, and I help her make you smile." Helen's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Emma, who was beaming up at her with such hope, such pride, such love, and then back at this strange, regal man who somehow saw her daughter as worthy of partnership rather than pity. Helen's voice broke. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll enjoy the cake," Valerius said softly. "That's all the thanks I need." Emma hugged her mother's legs, and Helen rested a hand on her daughter's head, still looking at Valerius with an expression somewhere between gratitude and confusion. Would you like to come in?" Helen asked hesitantly. Valerius glanced at the window. The sun had nearly set. The shadows were deepening. He could feel the night calling to him, feeling the ancient hunger stirring. If he stayed, she would see. She would know. "Not today," he said, and something in his voice was almost regretful. "But perhaps another time." He handed the cake box to Helen, and their fingers brushed briefly. She gasped. His skin was cold as winter stone. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Brooks," Valerius said. Then he looked down at Emma and smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "Thank you for teaching me about courage, Emma Brooks." "Will I see you again?" Emma asked. "I think," Valerius said slowly, "You might." He turned and walked down the hallway, and Helen stood in the doorway, watching him go. But when he reached the stairs, something impossible happened. He didn't descend. He simply vanished. One moment he was there, a tall figure in emerald robes with a black crown catching the last light. The next moment, the shadows seemed to fold around him like a cloak, and he was gone. Helen stood frozen, holding a $130 cake, watching the empty stairwell where a man who moved like darkness itself had just disappeared. And for the first time, she wondered what exactly her daughter had brought home. The apartment was small and humble, but Helen had done what she could to make it feel like a celebration. She cleared the tiny kitchen table and covered it with a cheerful yellow tablecloth that had seen better days. Mismatched plates, one with faded flowers, another with a chipped edge, a third from a set they'd gotten at a thrift store, were arranged carefully. 3 dime store candles in plastic holders flickered in the center, their light warm and gentle. The magnificent cake sat in the middle like a jewel in a modest crown, its sugar roses catching the candlelight and glowing as if lit from within. Emma had changed into her favorite dress, the one with the stars on it, and she'd even convinced Helen to let down her hair and put on the blue sweater that wasn't stained with work. Helen looked younger now, softer, though the exhaustion still lingered around her eyes like a shadow that wouldn't leave. "Make a wish, Mommy," Emma said, bouncing in her seat. Helen smiled, a real smile, the kind Emma hadn't seen in weeks, and closed her eyes. For a moment, she just breathed, and Emma wondered what she was wishing for. Bills paid? A day off? For Daddy to come back? Whatever it was, Helen kept it to herself. She opened her eyes and blew out the candles, and Emma clapped. "Happy birthday, Mommy." "Thank you, baby," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for all of this, for being so thoughtful." And a soft knock interrupted her. Both of them froze. It was nearly 8 o'clock. No one ever visited them. Helen's few friends were working their own double shifts, and family was scattered across states they couldn't afford to visit. Helen rose cautiously and moved to the door, peering through the peephole. Her breath caught. She opened the door slowly, and there he stood. Valerius. He looked different in the darkness, more real somehow, more solid, as if the night had given him substance the daylight couldn't quite hold. His silver hair seemed to shimmer with its own light, and his crimson eyes were softer than they'd been before, almost uncertain. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said quietly. "I wanted to wish you a happy birthday properly." Helen stared at him, speechless. Behind her, Emma let out a squeal of delight. "King Valerius, you came back." Helen stepped aside. What else could she do? And Valerius entered the small apartment, having to duck slightly beneath the doorframe. He moved carefully, as if afraid he might break something just by existing in this fragile, mortal space. He brought no gifts, carried nothing but himself. But somehow his presence filled the room completely. "Please," Helen said, finding her voice. "Sit." We were just about to cut the cake. Valerius lowered himself into one of the mismatched chairs, carefully, gingerly, as if he hadn't sat at a table in a very long time. Which, Helen realized with a strange chill, he probably hadn't. Emma immediately climbed into the chair next to him, chattering about how they'd lit the candles and how Mommy had made a wish and how beautiful the cake looked even prettier in candlelight. Helen cut the cake with shaking hands, aware of Valerius watching her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. She served him a piece on the chipped plate, then Emma, then herself. For a moment, no one moved. Then Emma picked up her fork and took a bite, her eyes closing in bliss. "It's so good, Mommy. It's the best cake ever." Helen tasted hers, and she had to agree. It was perfect. Rich and sweet, and somehow exactly what she needed without knowing she needed it. She looked at Valerius, who was staring at his plate as if he'd forgotten what to do with it. "Is something wrong?" Helen asked gently. "I haven't." Valerius paused, his voice low. "I haven't eaten cake in a very long time." "How long?" Emma asked with a child's blunt curiosity. 300 years, Valerius said, so quietly Helen almost didn't hear him. The number hung in the air like something impossible, something that shouldn't be real. But looking at him, at the ancient weariness in his eyes, at the way he held himself apart from the world, Helen believed him. Then you should definitely have some, Emma said matter-of-factly. Everything's better with cake. Valerius picked up his fork. His hand trembled slightly, barely noticeably, but Helen saw it. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and something crossed his face that looked almost like pain. "It's sweet," he said, his voice rough. "I'd forgotten how sweet things could be." They ate in comfortable silence, Emma swinging her legs and humming, Helen stealing glances at this impossible man in her kitchen, and Valerius sitting very still, as if afraid that moving too quickly might shatter whatever spell had allowed him to be here. When they finished, Emma suddenly clapped her hands.
Oh,
"We should make wishes." "We already did, baby," Helen said gently. I blew out the candles. "Not you, Mommy. Him." Emma pointed at Valerius. "King Valerius should make a wish too, even if it's not his birthday. Everyone should get to make wishes." Valerius looked startled, almost frightened.
I
don't. Don't you know how?" Emma asked, tilting her head. Valerius's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't remember." The confession seemed to cost him something. Helen saw the vulnerability flash across his face. This ancient, powerful creature admitting that he'd forgotten something as simple, as human, as making a wish. "It's easy," Emma said. "You close your eyes, think about something you really, really want, and then you wish for it as hard as you can." "Want me to show you?" Before Valerius could respond, Emma closed her eyes tight, scrunched up her whole face in concentration, and whispered, "I wish King Valerius wasn't lonely anymore." Helen's breath caught. Valerius went completely still, his crimson eyes fixed on Emma's small, earnest face. "Your turn," Emma said, opening her eyes. "Just like that. Close your eyes and wish." Slowly, so slowly it seemed to hurt, Valerius closed his eyes. Helen watched him, this mysterious figure sitting at her battered kitchen table, surrounded by dime store candles and mismatched plates. In the soft light, he looked less like a king and more like someone who'd been lost for a very long time and had just now found a place that felt like shelter. His lips moved soundlessly. Whatever he wished for, he kept it locked behind his teeth, behind centuries of walls he'd built to keep the world out. When he opened his eyes, they were bright, too bright.
wet.
"Did you wish?" Emma asked. "Yes," Valerius said, his voice cracking. "I wished." Helen reached across the table without thinking and placed her hand over his. His skin was cold, impossibly cold, but somehow it didn't feel wrong. It felt like winter moonlight, like snow that hasn't fallen yet, like something ancient and patient. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming, for making this special." Valerius looked at her hand on his, then at her face, and something in his expression broke open. Just a crack, just enough for her to see the vast loneliness inside. "I should go," he said abruptly, standing so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. "It's late. You should rest."
I'm sorry.
You don't have to apologize," Helen said, rising as well. But Valerius was already moving toward the door, his composure fracturing like ice under pressure. "Thank you for allowing me to." He couldn't finish. He reached the door, paused with his hand on the knob, and looked back at them. At Emma with her uneven pigtails and starry dress, at Helen with her tired eyes and gentle smile, at this tiny, warm space filled with love and mismatched dishes and the smell of chocolate cake. "Happy birthday, Helen Brooks," he said, and his voice carried the weight of centuries. Then he opened the door and vanished into the darkness beyond. Helen stood frozen, listening to the silence he left behind. Emma tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, why did King Valerius look so sad?" Helen knelt down and pulled her daughter close, holding her tight. "I think, baby, because he forgot what it feels like to be happy. And sometimes remembering hurts." She looked at the open door, at the night beyond, and wondered if he would come back, and found herself hoping, desperately, dangerously, that he would. 3 nights after her birthday, Helen woke to the sound of something she couldn't name. Not a crash, not a voice, just wrongness. A feeling that crawled up her spine like cold fingers, telling her that something outside her window didn't belong there. She lay perfectly still in the darkness, listening. There was again a scraping sound, like claws on brick, and beneath it something else. A low sound that might have been breathing, if breathing could sound hungry. Helen slipped out of bed and moved to Emma's room, her heart hammering. Her daughter slept peacefully, one arm thrown over her stuffed rabbit, completely unaware. Helen stood in the doorway, torn between waking her and letting her sleep, when she felt it. Cold air. Not from the window, that was closed and locked. This came from nowhere, seeping through the walls like the building itself was exhaling winter. For 3 nights, it had been like this. Strange sounds, impossible drafts, the feeling of being watched by something that saw in the dark better than she ever could. Helen told herself it was nothing. Old buildings made noises. Winter brought cold. Fear was just her exhausted mind playing tricks. But she didn't believe it. And she kept thinking about the way Valerius had vanished into shadow. The way his skin had been cold as stone. The way his eyes had glowed red in the dim light of her kitchen. What had her daughter brought into their lives? On the rooftop across the street, Valerius crouched in the darkness like a gargoyle come to life. He had been here every night since the birthday party, watching, waiting, protecting. He told himself it was foolish, that he had no claim to this woman and child, no right to stand guard over their fragile mortal lives. But he stayed anyway, because 3 nights ago he had felt it. The moment another of his kind caught his scent in that apartment, tasted the air and recognized that their king, their reclusive, untouchable king, had been there, had sat at a table. I ate cake. I smiled. The rogue would come. They always did, drawn to weakness like flies to decay. And there, Valerius's head snapped up, his predator instincts flaring. On the fire escape below Helen's window, a figure moved with inhuman grace. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that glowed yellow in the dark and fingers that ended in claws. Marcus, a rogue from one of the fallen houses, bitter and feral and dangerous. Valerius moved. He dropped from the rooftop in complete silence, landing on the fire escape with the weight of shadow. Marcus spun, hissing, his fangs bared in a snarl that was more animal than man. "My lord," Marcus said, his voice dripping with mockery. "How far the mighty have fallen, skulking around human dwellings like a lovesick fool." "Leave," Valerius said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command. "Leave now, and I will forget this trespass." Marcus laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Trespass? You're the one who's betrayed everything we are. Sitting at their tables, eating their food, caring about them." He spat the last word like poison. "You've grown soft, Valerius.
Weak.
And word is spreading." I said leave. Or what? Marcus's eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "You'll protect them? You'll fight for a human woman and her help?" The great Lord Draven, reduced to a lapdog. Valerius's expression didn't change, but the temperature around them dropped 10 degrees. Last warning. Marcus lunged. The fight was brutal and brief. Marcus was fast, vicious, desperate, but Valerius was a king. 3 centuries of combat, of war, of survival compressed into movements too quick for mortal eyes to follow. They collided in a blur of shadow and violence, and the fire escape groaned under their weight. "You're weak," Marcus snarled, raking claws across Valerius's shoulder. "You're nothing. You're." Valerius caught him by the throat mid-sentence and slammed him against the brick wall with enough force to crack stone. His crimson eyes blazed with ancient fury. "I am Lord Valerius Draven," he said, his voice cold as the grave. "King of Eclaveria. And you will not touch them." He struck, once, precise and final. Marcus's eyes went wide, then empty. His body crumbled to ash that scattered on the winter wind, leaving nothing behind but the faint smell of decay. Valerius stood alone on the fire escape, breathing hard. His shoulder burned where Marcus's claws had torn through fabric and flesh. Not a mortal wound, he'd survived far worse, but it hurt. Everything hurts. And he realized, with something like despair, that he'd been right to stay away. That caring made you vulnerable. That connection was a weapon your enemies would always use against you. He should leave.
Right now.
Before. Who are you? Valerius froze. Helen stood at the base of the fire escape, wrapped in a thin robe, her face pale but her eyes blazing with something between terror and fury. She must have heard the fight, must have come down despite the danger. Go inside, Valerius said roughly. Please, Helen. Go inside and lock your door and forget you saw. I said, who are you? Her voice shook, but she didn't retreat. What just happened? What was that thing, and why is it hunting us, and why are you bleeding, Ash? Valerius looked at his wounded shoulder. Black blood, not red, never red, seeped through his torn robes, and where it touched the air, it dissolved into shadow. He met her eyes, and saw that she already knew. Some part of her had always known. You should be afraid of me, he said quietly. Maybe. Helen's jaw set stubbornly. But you just killed something to protect us.
So talk. Now.
Valerius hesitated, centuries of secrecy warring with something newer, something that whispered, she deserves the truth. I am Lord Valerius Draven, he said slowly, each word careful. King of Eclaveria, a kingdom that exists in the spaces between your world and the darkness. I am. He took a breath he didn't need. I am a vampire, Helen. And I've been alive for over 300 years. Helen's face went white. She took a step back, her hand rising to her throat in an instinctive gesture of protection. The creature I'd just killed was one of my kind, Valerius continued, his voice flat. A rogue who believed I'd grown weak by associating with you and Emma. He came to prove a point. Others will follow. As long as I remain near you, you are in danger. Then why did you come back? Helen whispered. Why help Emma? Why come to my birthday party? Why any of it if? Because I was lonely. The words burst from Valerius like a confession torn from his chest. Because your daughter looked at me and saw something worth saving. Because for the first time in 3 centuries, I felt alive. And I am selfish enough, weak enough, to want to feel that again, even if it puts you at risk. They stood in the cold darkness, the truth between them like a chasm. Then footsteps, small, quick, barefoot on concrete. Mommy? Emma appeared around the corner, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. She looked at her mother, then at Valerius with his torn robes and shadow blood and ancient, exhausted eyes. Baby, go back inside, Helen said quickly, moving to block Emma. Right now, Emma, please. But Emma ducked around her mother and walked straight to Valerius. He stiffened, expecting her to scream, to run, to finally see him for the monster he was. Instead, Emma reached out and took his cold hand in both of hers, her small fingers impossibly warm against his skin. She looked up at him with those serious blue eyes, the eyes that had first asked him if monsters got lonely, and said 5 words that broke him completely. You don't look like a monster to me. Valerius sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking, and for the first time in 300 years, the vampire king of Eclaveria allowed himself to weep. Helen brought him inside. It was foolish, maybe dangerous, but watching this ancient, powerful creature kneel in the alley with a child's hand in his and tears streaming down his pale face, she couldn't bring herself to turn him away. She settled him on the worn couch while Emma hovered nearby, still clutching her rabbit, still holding Valerius's hand as if afraid he might disappear. Helen fetched the first aid kit, knowing, somehow, that it wouldn't be enough for whatever he was, but needing to do something. Tell me, Helen said quietly, kneeling beside the couch. Tell me what happened to you. Valerius was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, lost in memory. I was born in 1707, he said. I became king of Eclaveria at 25, when my father fell in battle. I ruled for only 3 years before. He paused, pain flickering across his face. Before I was turned, made into this. A creature caught between life and death, gifted with eternity and cursed with it in equal measure. Helen carefully peeled back the torn fabric of his robe, exposing the wound on his shoulder. It was already healing, the flesh knitting back together in a way that defied nature, but she cleaned it anyway, her touch gentle. I tried to rule well, Valerius continued, to protect my kingdom, both the living and the undead. For decades, I maintained the balance. I had advisors, friends, His voice cracked. People I loved. But time is cruel to those who don't share your immortality. They aged.
They died.
One by one, everyone I cared for turned to dust, and I remained. I'm sorry, Helen whispered. The kingdom fell into ruin without me truly noticing. I was so lost in grief that I let centuries slip through my fingers. By the time I looked up, Eclaveria was a shadow of what it had been, a forgotten realm full of forgotten creatures, ruled by a king who had forgotten how to care. Emma climbed onto the couch beside him, pressing close. When did you stop having birthdays? Valerius looked at her, his crimson eyes soft. The year I lost my sister. She was the last one who remembered. The last one who would sing to me, who would light candles and make me wish for things. After she died, he trailed off. I stopped believing wishes could come true. Stopped believing there was anything worth celebrating. How long ago was that? Helen asked. 300 years. The number settled over them like snow, quiet and heavy. I withdrew into solitude, Valerius said. I convinced myself that connection only brought suffering. That caring was a weakness I couldn't afford. I built walls around my heart until I could barely remember I had one. He looked at Emma, then at Helen. Until a little girl with $5 walked into a bakery and asked me if monsters got lonely. And you said yes, Emma said simply. I said yes. Valerius's voice was barely a whisper. Because it was true. Because I have been so lonely, Emma, for so long. Lonely in a way that has no words, that echoes through centuries, that makes even immortality feel like a prison. Emma suddenly scrambled off the couch and ran to her room. Helen and Valerius exchanged glances. Helen's concerned, Valerius's confused. She returned moments later with a piece of paper and crayons clutched in her small hands. I made this for you, Emma said, climbing back up and thrusting the drawing at Valerius. Earlier today, before all the scary stuff happened, I was going to give it to you next time you visited. Valerius took the paper with trembling hands. It was a child's drawing, simple and honest in the way only a child's art could be. 3 figures holding hands, a little girl with pigtails in the middle, a woman with long hair on one side, and a tall figure with a crown on the other. The sun was a bright yellow circle in the corner, and hearts floated around them like bubbles. At the bottom, in Emma's careful printing, my family, something inside Valerius shattered. Not broke, shattered. Like ice that had been frozen for so long it had forgotten it could melt. He stared at the drawing, at the way Emma had included him, had drawn him not as a monster or a king but as family, and felt something warm and terrible and wonderful bloom in his chest. Emma, he breathed. I don't. You don't have to be lonely anymore, Emma said matter-of-factly. You can be with us. Right, Mommy? Helen looked at Valerius, at this ancient creature holding her daughter's crayon drawing like it was made of gold, at the tears still wet on his face, at the vulnerability in his eyes that spoke of centuries of pain. She should be afraid. She should send him away. She should protect her daughter from this dangerous, impossible thing. Instead, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. Right, she said softly. Valerius looked at her, really looked at her, and Helen felt the weight of that gaze. It was like being seen by something timeless, something that understood loss and loneliness and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, you could find connection again. You should rest, Helen said, because she didn't know what else to say. That wound, even if it's healing, you should rest. I don't sleep, Valerius said. Not the way you do. Then just stay.
For a while.
You're safe here. The word seemed to hit him like a physical thing. Safe. When was the last time anywhere had felt safe? They sat in comfortable silence, Emma eventually dozing off against Valerius's side, the drawing still clutched in his hand. Helen fetched a blanket and draped it over her daughter, her movements gentle and practiced. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Valerius asked suddenly. "You know what I am, what I've done, what I could do." Helen settled into the chair across from him, studying his face in the dim light. "Because I've spent my whole life being afraid," she said quietly. "Afraid I couldn't pay the bills. Afraid I couldn't give Emma everything she deserved. Afraid I'd fail her somehow. And you know what I learned? What? That fear is exhausting. And sometimes," she smiled slightly, "sometimes the scariest looking things are just lonely. It just hurt. Just trying to find their way home." Valerius felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for 300 years. "I will protect you," he said, and it sounded like a vow, like something sacred. "Both of you. From rogues, from enemies, from anything that would harm you. As long as I exist, no shadow will touch you." "You don't have to." "I do," Valerius interrupted, his voice fierce. "You gave me something I thought was lost forever. You gave me back my heart. Let me use it to keep yours beating." Helen's breath caught. In the dim light of her modest apartment, with her daughter asleep and this impossible creature looking at her like she was salvation itself, she felt something shift inside her. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first spark, the dangerous, wonderful possibility that maybe, just maybe, broken things could heal each other. "Stay tonight," she whispered. "Stay and rest and be safe. Just for tonight." Valerius looked at Emma's drawing again, at the three figures holding hands, at the word family written in crayon. "Just for tonight," he agreed. But they both knew it was a lie, because already neither of them could imagine what forever would look like apart. The whispers began in the dark places of the world, in abandoned castles where ancient creatures gathered, in underground courts where the eternal held their councils, in shadows that stretched between cities. The news spread like poison through water. "The king has changed." Lord Valerius Draven, the Winter King, the eternal sovereign of Eclaveria, has been seen in the mortal world, walking their streets, entering their shops, sitting at their tables. He protects a human woman and her child. He has grown weak. For 5 nights, Valerius stayed close to the apartment, never far, always watching. He told himself it was temporary, that once the danger passed, he would return to his solitude, to the cold safety of distance. But each night, Emma would press her face to the window and wave when she spotted him on the rooftop across the street. Each night, Helen would leave the porch light on, a small beacon that said, "You're welcome here." And each night, it became harder to remember why he'd ever thought loneliness was safer than this. On the 6th night they came, not one rogue this time. 4 of them, ancient, powerful, angry. 2 were assassins from rival houses who saw opportunity in a weakened king. 2 were loyalists who believed they were saving him from himself. Valerius sensed them before they arrived, and felt their presence like a disturbance in the fabric of night itself. He moved with supernatural speed, intercepting them 3 blocks from Helen's building. "Go back," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of rule. "This is not your concern." The lead assassin, a woman with white hair and eyes like black glass, smiled with too many teeth. "But it is, my lord. You've made it our concern. You've made yourself a target. And used the means to protect you," added one of the loyalists, a broad-shouldered vampire named Constantine who had served Valerius's father. "Come back to Eclaveria. Leave this distraction. You're needed at home." "I have no home," Valerius said coldly. "Because you abandoned it." Constantine's voice rose with frustration. "For what? For mortals who will die in the blink of an eye? For a child's crayon drawing? You're a king, Valerius. Act like one." The assassin moved, fast as lightning, aiming not for Valerius, but toward the apartment. Valerius intercepted her mid-leap, and they collided with enough force to crack the pavement. The fight exploded into chaos, shadow against shadow, ancient power against ancient rage. But there were 4 of them and one of them, and even a king could be overwhelmed. Inside the apartment, Helen bolted upright at the sound of distant thunder that wasn't thunder. Emma was already awake, standing at the window. "Mommy, something's wrong." Helen rushed to her side and looked out. In the street below, she could see them, figures moving too fast to track, darkness folding and unfolding, and in the center of it all, Valerius fighting with desperate, brutal grace. "Get your coat," Helen said suddenly. "What?"
Now, Emma.
"We're leaving." She threw clothes into a bag with shaking hands, grabbed her purse and Emma's rabbit, and they ran down the stairs. But when Helen burst onto the street, Valerius was suddenly there, blocking her path, his eyes wild with fear. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Get back inside. Lock the doors." "I told you to. You told us nothing." Helen shot back, her voice shaking with anger and terror. "You think we didn't notice you watching from the rooftops? You think we don't know you're trying to protect us? That's exactly what I'm doing. So please, please, Helen, go back inside and let me." "Let you what?" Helen's eyes blazed. "Let you fight alone? Let you shut us out because you're afraid? Let you make the same mistake you've been making for 300 years. Valerius flinched, as if she'd struck him. "They're coming for you because of us," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't you understand? Every moment I spend with you, every connection I make, it puts a target on your back. I thought I could protect you from the shadows, but there are too many of them. Too many who want to use you against me or kill me for daring to care. So, you're going to leave?" Helen's voice was barely a whisper now. "You're going to walk away to keep us safe?" "Yes." The word tore from him like flesh from bone. "Because I can't watch you die. I can't add you to the list of everyone I've loved and lost. I can't." Emma stepped forward, placing herself between them. She looked up at Valerius with those serious blue eyes, the eyes that had first seen past his crown and his power to the lonely creature beneath. "My teacher says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Emma said quietly. "It means you're scared, but you do the thing anyway. You taught me that, remember? We're birthday courage partners. That means we're brave together." "Emma, you're scared we'll get hurt," Emma continued. "But we're scared too. We're scared you'll leave because you think it's safer. But it's not safer, King Valerius. It's just lonelier." The words hit him like dawn light, burning, revealing, impossible to look away from. "She's right," Helen said softly, stepping closer. "You can't protect us by shutting us out. You can't keep us safe by walking away. All you can do is stand with us. Let us stand with you. And face whatever comes together." Valerius looked at them. This mortal woman with fire in her eyes and this child with wisdom beyond her years, and felt 3 centuries of walls crumbling inside him. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know how to do this. How to care and fight at the same time. How to love without fear consuming me." "Nobody does," Helen said. "You just try. Every day you try." Behind them, the shadows stirred. The others were regrouping, circling, preparing for another assault. Emma took Valerius's cold hand in hers. Helen took the other. "So, what do you choose?" Helen asked. "Loneliness? Or family?" Valerius looked at their hands, small and warm, holding his. He thought of Emma's drawing, of birthday cake and mismatched plates, of Helen's porch light left on like a promise. He thought of 300 years of emptiness stretching behind him and the terrifying, beautiful possibility of something different stretching ahead. He thought of how much it had hurt to lose everyone he'd ever loved, and realized it would hurt even more to never love again. "Family," he whispered. Then louder, stronger, like a vow that echoed through the darkness. "Family." The shadows around them recoiled at the word, at the certainty in his voice, at the sudden blazing power of a king who had finally remembered what he was fighting for. Valerius's eyes flared crimson, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of his ancient authority. I am Lord Valerius Draven, King of Eclaveria, and I have made my choice. These are under my protection. They are mine, and anyone who threatens them threatens me. The assassins and loyalists materialized from the shadows, surrounding them. But Valerius didn't flinch. He stood with Helen and Emma at his back, facing his enemies, and for the first time in 3 centuries, he wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting for something worth living for. Come then, he said, his voice cold as winter itself. But know this, I am not the broken king you thought you'd find. I am not weak because I care. I am stronger because I finally have something to protect. The night held its breath. And then, with a snarl of rage and reluctant respect, the assassins retreated. Even Constantine bowed his head, something like understanding in his ancient eyes. The kingdom awaits your return, my lord, Constantine said quietly. When you're ready. I know, Valerius replied. But first I have a family to protect. They vanished into shadow, and the street fell silent. Valerius turned to Helen and Emma, and for the first time in 300 years, the vampire king allowed himself to hope. They came at midnight when the moon was dark and the city slept. Not the assassins who had retreated. Not the loyalists who had bowed their heads. But something worse, a rogue faction that had been waiting, watching, gathering strength. 10 of them, maybe more, their hatred of Valerius's weakness, turning them feral and reckless. They tore through the building's entrance like a storm, and Valerius felt it instantly, the violent rupture in the night, the surge of predatory hunger aimed at the 3rd floor. At Helen. At Emma. He moved faster than thought, materializing in the hallway just as the first rogue reached the apartment door. The creature turned, snarling, and Valerius drove his fist through its chest, reducing it to ash before it could scream. But there were more. So many more. Inside, Helen heard the sounds, crashes, inhuman shrieks, the terrible violence of supernatural combat. She grabbed Emma and pulled her into the bathroom, the only room with no windows. Stay here, Helen commanded, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Promise me, Emma. But King Valerius, promise me. I promise, Emma whispered, clutching her rabbit. Helen kissed her forehead and locked the bathroom door from the outside, pocketing the key. Then she grabbed the iron poker from beside the decorative fireplace, useless against vampires, probably, but she refused to be helpless. The apartment door exploded inward. 3 rogues poured through, their eyes wild with bloodlust. Helen raised the poker, standing between them and the bathroom door, and screamed. Valerius! He heard her. Through the chaos, through the violence, through the roar of battle, he heard Helen's voice calling his name, and something inside him ignited. This was what it meant to have something to lose. This was the terror he'd avoided for 3 centuries, the vulnerability he'd sworn never to feel again. And it was also what made him unstoppable. Valerius stopped holding back. Power erupted from him like a supernova, ancient, terrible, magnificent. His eyes blazed crimson bright enough to cast shadows in reverse. The black crown on his head flared with ethereal light, and when he raised his hands, the very air obeyed. Shadow became solid, wrapping around his enemies like living chains. Ice crystallized from nothing, encasing rogues mid-leap. And his voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of 300 years of royal authority. Enough. The command shattered windows. The rogues in the hallway crumbled to ash, and Valerius moved through them like an avenging angel, beautiful and terrifying, every inch the king he'd been before loneliness had hollowed him out. He reached the apartment just as one of the rogues lunged at Helen. Valerius caught it by the throat, lifted it off its feet, and with a surge of power that lit the entire room silver white, he obliterated it completely. The remaining 2 rogues fled, vanishing into shadow, their survival instinct finally overriding their rage. Silence felt like ash. Valerius stood in the center of Helen's destroyed living room, breathing hard, his power still crackling around him like lightning. He turned to Helen and collapsed. The centuries of solitude, the nights without rest, the emotional toll of caring again, it all crashed down at once. He fell to his knees, then to his side, his eyes fluttering closed. Valerius! Helen dropped the poker and rushed to him, falling to her knees beside him. She cradled his face in her hands, and his skin was so cold it burned. No, 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 stay with me. Please, please. His eyes opened, barely, just slits of crimson in his pale face. Emma? Safe. She's safe. You saved us. You. Helen's voice broke. Don't you dare leave now. Don't you dare. Helen. His hand rose weakly to cover hers. I need to tell you. Tell me later. When you're.
Now.
The word carried urgency despite his weakness. You gave me back my heart, Helen. You and Emma. You made me remember what it means to feel. And I. He took a shuddering breath. I love you. However impossible, however dangerous, I love you. Helen's tears fell onto his face, warm against his cold skin. You ridiculous, impossible man, she whispered. I love you too. I don't know how or why or when it happened, but I do. I love you. The bathroom door rattled. Mommy? King Valerius? Helen fumbled for the key, unlocked the door. Emma burst out and threw herself onto them both, her small arms trying to encompass them in a hug. You're okay, Emma sobbed. You're both okay. Valerius managed to wrap one arm around her, pulling them both close. His strength was returning slowly, warmth seeping back into his limbs from their touch, their presence, their love. I'm okay, he murmured. We're all okay. They stayed like that on the floor of the destroyed apartment, a vampire king, a tired mother, and a little girl with uneven pigtails, holding each other as if they could keep the world at bay through sheer force of connection. And outside, beyond the shattered windows, something impossible happened. Dawn began to break. Valerius felt it, the sun rising, the light that had been his enemy for 3 centuries. But instead of retreating into shadow, he stood. He walked to the window, Helen's hand in his, Emma at his side. Together, they watched the sky turn gold. And for the first time in 300 years, Valerius Draven watched the sunrise without fear. Because he wasn't watching it alone. 10 years later, the Grand Hall of Eclaveria had been restored to its former glory, or rather, to something better than glory. Where once there had been only cold stone and shadow, now there were windows. Where silence had reigned, now there was life. The hall was filled with representatives from both worlds, human diplomats in tailored suits sitting beside vampire nobles in ancient finery, city mayors conversing carefully with clan elders, scientists discussing blood synthesis programs with creatures who remembered when science was called alchemy. It was an impossible gathering, a fragile, precious piece built on a foundation that had begun with a little girl, a lonely king, and $5. At the center of it all stood Emma Brooks, now 15 years old, her pigtails long gone but her serious blue eyes unchanged. She wore a simple dress, neither too formal nor too casual, and around her neck hung a pendant, a small silver crown intertwined with a human heart, the symbol of the Unity Accord. She stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd, and for a moment, she was 5 years old again, clutching a crumpled bill and hoping it would be enough. I walked into a bakery with $5, Emma began, her voice steady and clear. I was hoping to buy my mom a birthday cake. The cake I wanted cost $130, 26 times what I had. By every logical measure, I should have failed. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. But then something impossible happened. A stranger walked in. A man who looked lonely, who carried centuries of pain in his eyes, who had forgotten what it meant to celebrate anything at all. Emma's voice softened. He didn't just buy me the cake. He became my birthday courage partner. He taught me that being brave doesn't mean having enough. It means trying anyway. In the front row, Valerius sat in formal robes of deep emerald and silver, the black crown on his head catching the light. His crimson eyes were fixed on Emma with pride so profound it was almost painful to witness. Beside him, Helen Brooks, No longer exhausted, no longer working double shifts, but still carrying that same gentle strength, held his hand. Her fingers were warm against his cold ones, a reminder that some connections transcended the boundaries of life and death. That stranger became my father, Emma continued. Not through blood, but through choice. Through showing up, even when it was dangerous. Through choosing connection over safety, love over loneliness, hope over fear. She looked directly at Valerius and smiled. He saved us that day in the bakery. But the truth is, we saved each other. My mother gave him back his heart. I gave him a reason to use it. And he gave us a family that spans two worlds. Emma turned to address the full assembly now, her voice growing stronger. That's what we're building here. Not tolerance, family. Not coexistence, partnership. We are birthday courage partners. All of us, trying to build something beautiful with whatever we have, even when it doesn't seem like enough. She paused, letting the words settle. 10 years ago, I learned that $5 could change everything. Not because of what it could buy, but because of the connection it made possible. Today, we stand at another impossible moment. Humans and vampires, mortal and eternal, working together to create a future neither could build alone. Emma lifted her chin, and in that moment, she looked exactly like the little girl who had once asked a monster if he was lonely. So, let's be brave together. Let's build this new world not with fear, but with compassion. Not with walls, but with open doors. Not with isolation, but with the kind of love that says, you belong here. You matter. You're seen. The applause began slowly. A human representative first, then a vampire elder, then more, building like a wave until the entire hall was standing, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. Emma stepped back from the podium and walked directly to Valerius. He rose to meet her, and she hugged him fiercely. This ancient king who had once believed he was too broken to love, now holding his daughter like she was the most precious thing in all his centuries of existence. I'm proud of you, he whispered against her hair. I learned from the best, Emma whispered back. Helen joined them, and for a moment, the three of them stood together in the center of that grand hall, a family that shouldn't have been possible, that had been built on $5 and courage and the radical belief that love could bridge any divide. Later, when the speeches were done and the crowds had dispersed, they walked through the restored gardens of Eclaveria. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, the same colors that had filled Madame Rosetta's bakery all those years ago. Emma walked between Helen and Valerius, holding both their hands, and thought about that afternoon. About how scared she'd been, clutching her $5. About how impossible everything had seemed. About how a stranger with sad eyes had knelt beside her and offered partnership instead of pity. Do you ever go back? Emma asked suddenly. To the bakery? Valerius smiled, a real smile, the kind that came easily now after years of practice. Every year on your mother's birthday, Madame Rosetta saves us a chocolate cake with sugar roses. She recognized you, didn't she? Helen asked. That first day. She knew what you were. She knew what I had been. Valerius corrected gently. A creature of myth and loneliness. But she also saw what I could become. He squeezed both their hands. What you helped me become. Emma looked up at him, at this impossible father who had given her a kingdom and taught her that courage wasn't about having no fear, but about choosing love despite it. Thank you, she said simply, for being brave enough to walk through that door. Valerius stopped walking. He knelt, just as he had that first day, so he was at eye level with Emma, even though she was nearly as tall as her mother now. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion, for seeing past the monster to the man who was desperate to remember how to be human. They embraced there in the golden light, and Helen wrapped her arms around them both, and they stood that way as the sun set and the stars emerged. A little girl with $5. A lonely king with 300 years of grief. A mother with tired eyes and an open heart. 3 impossible pieces that had somehow formed a family, and in doing so, had changed 2 worlds forever. In a bakery filled with warm light and the smell of sugar, miracles still happen. They happen when lonely creatures remember they can love. When tired mothers open their hearts to the impossible. When little girls with barely enough choose courage anyway. And sometimes, just sometimes, $5 is more than enough. It's everything.